This video will demonstrate how to properly install the prop-tight locking nut system. Once the propeller and key stock have been fitted on the shaft, install a standard full-size nut and tighten to push the propeller hub securely up on the taper of the shaft. The reason to use a full-size nut first is that it has more threads and can apply more force on the hub of the propeller. If you have a specialized tool for installing and removing a propeller, you can skip this step. A big crescent wrench and a block of wood are commonly used to install propeller nuts, but a striking wrench is the best option. It eliminates the need to block the propeller or to use a pipe wrench to hold the shaft while tightening. Now that the propeller has been pushed up tight on the shaft taper, remove the full-size nut and replace it with the thin nut. Tighten the thin nut to the point where it's tight, but not over-tightened, leaving a few degrees left if needed to help with the alignment of the cotter pin. Now you are ready to install the locking nut. Position the shaft so the cotter pinhole is easily seen while lining up with the slots of the locking nut. Screw on the locking nut by hand until it makes contact with the thin nut. Start tightening with the wrench, keeping in mind that since coarse threads tighten quickly, you will most likely only be able to tighten the locking nut by one slot to line up with the cotter pin hole. Remember, you must always line up the slot of the nut with the cotter pin hole while turning the nut in a clockwise direction. Never change direction and turn the nut counterclockwise to line up with the cotter pin hole in the shaft. If by chance the cotter pin hole won't line up with a slot and you can't tighten the locking nut anymore, take a marker and put a reference mark on both the thin nut and the hub of the propeller. Back off the locking nut to get it out of the way. Put the wrench back on the thin nut and advance it a few degrees or the distance that the locking nut slot needed to go to line up with the cotter pin hole. However far you advance the thin nut, the locking nut will follow. Screw the locking nut back on and tighten down with the wrench. The cotter pin hole and the slot of the nut should now line up. The cotter pin can be installed the traditional way with the loop running side to side, or installed where the loop is running fore and aft and is sitting down inside the slot for a lower profile. It's a good practice to use a new cotter pin rather than reusing an old one. Metal tends to weaken after being bent repeatedly.